Welcome to the Stanford MBA two-generational wisdom bridge across 30 years. I'm your host, Catherine Keogh McLennan from the MBA class of 1995 of Stanford. In each episode, I bring together one of my classmates, now in our 60s, give or take, and a member of the class of 2025, now in their 30s, give or take, and about to graduate into an entirely different world than we graduated in 1995. Back then, we finished our MBAs just as the internet was emerging. Today's grads are stepping into a future shaped by artificial intelligence, uncertainty, and we hope that we express possibility. These conversations bridge generations, share lessons, and spark reflections on leadership, life, and what's next. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Tony Ross from the Stanford MBA class of 1995, one of my classmates, and Marc-Aurèle Stark from the class of 2025. Tony spent nearly 22 years at Apple, leading America's operations after key roles in worldwide planning and Mac product operations. Now based in Park City, Utah, he serves on the advisory board of Crowdstake, a platform using crypto rewards to fund new initiatives, and he's preparing for his second climb of Denali. Marc-Aurèle is a transformative sales leader, blending cutting-edge AI technology with human connection to redefine how companies drive growth. A second-year MBA student at Stanford, he's led global teams at MuleSoft, Salesforce, shaped AI go-to-market strategies for startups, and brings the same energy to his passions for photography, indie film, and team building, often with a mic in hand for karaoke. Together, Tony and Marc-Aurèle explored two awakenings, the internet in the 90s and today's AI revolution, and what it means to lead with purpose across generations. And Marc, where do we find you today?
It's Wednesdays at the GSB, so we don't have class, but for some reason I'm still back to back for the whole day today. So I think it's kind of funny to be here and taking this podcast from here.
What's the back-to-back activity that you got going?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't even know where my time goes, and I should maybe be way more intentional about it. I'm doing two part-time jobs on the side, so I think that's making me busy generally. And I'm also TAing this class, so essentially it's a lot of work on top of classes. So yeah, I think it ends up, yeah.
What's the class that you're TAing?
AI Awakening, which is an across the street class.
That's what we were discussing when you came in.
Yeah, tell me about AI Awakening. How cool is that?
It's a really cool class, actually. I took it last year, and it was one of the best classes I took at Stanford. And so then I wanted to be involved and be a TA for that, just because of how amazing it was. But essentially, it's more of a speaker series, which is interesting because we get a lot of. I think the issue with AI, I was actually at a dinner yesterday with Eric Horvitz, who's the chief scientist of Microsoft, for this class, which is funny. But he was saying that back in the days, when he did his PhD on AI, a lot of people were doing a PhD on AI because to master AI, essentially, you had a few papers, right? Like, in a sense, it was a relatively small field. And now it's such an insane field where there's something new every day, and it's impossible to know all the literature in AI anymore, right? And so I think this is a really good class because it's a speaker series, and because you get all of these incredibly smart people who spend so much time on it, and so you get a lot of interesting perspectives. But yeah, some cool people are Eric Horvitz, chief scientist of Microsoft, Mira Murati, the former CTO of OpenAI, who now just started her own startup. I think she raised a 1 billion seed, which is a record of some sort. It's coming in 2 weeks, so I'm excited to see her again and hear what she's doing.
Okay, I'm coming back to this because, Tony, I'm going to say where you were, but we did not have Internet Awakening.
Yeah.
Why didn't we have Internet Awakening?
We should have. I mean, totally dating us. The first time I ever used email was at Stanford.
And barely at that, right? So where do we find you, Tony?
I'm in Park City.
Nice.
Retired a couple of years ago after 22 years at Apple, and we'd had a place here and been coming regularly, and so we ended up retiring here.
Oh,
and it's been a surprisingly warm spring, but we have a storm coming in this afternoon, and expecting 6 inches of snow.
And So that retired word, Tony, you're the first of our class to actually use that word.
I don't know. I met some others at our last reunion who, whether they said it or not, are retired. And anyway, what retired for us doesn't mean what it meant for our parents, of course.
No, it doesn't.
It means I choose what I spend my time on, and it's a lot more variety.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
love that. I love that. But it's interesting. The internet was definitely coming alive, Tony. And in 1995, when we graduated, a company called Netscape went public. That was Tony. That was the first retail internet browser, I believe. And it, I think it became AOL eventually. But anyway, it was an interesting thing. So one of the fascinations I have with doing this podcast is with not only because there's 30 years apart and we're having our 30th reunion in October, but your two classes are emerging into these two different worlds. And the fact that this, you're even talking about AI awakening is quite to the point. So what do you see?
So I came to the GSB with, I explored a few things, and I think my initial hypothesis was more around education. I wanted to make more of an impact around that. And it's a wonderful institution for that, obviously. I think it has a long-standing history of having a dual degree with the Graduate School of Education, and obviously a lot of amazing startups in edtech came out of the GSB. But the closer I got to education and thinking about innovation within the space, the closer I got to AI, actually, in a way, because I think it's pretty revolutionary within the field, or it will impact the field in ways that we're not expecting yet. And I think partly that class that I took last year and that I'm now TAing this year, I think I went to that dinner with Mira Murati at the time. And for me, some of the discussions that we had around AGI potentially happening a lot sooner than we think. It doesn't matter when it happens, right? And to me, it's not necessarily about whether it's 2032 or 2035 and so on, but it's just realizing that we're very much at such a interesting pivotal moment for history and for humanity when it comes to how things are going to change, whether on a societal level or economic level or political level as well, right? From just like how AI is going to impact all of these spheres. It's hard for me to not want to be closer to the technology to try to understand it better, so then I can go back to education or something. I think my thesis is that the models at the moment, the foundational models, are evolving so fast that it's better to be close and try to understand what's happening. And I think a lot of people are not, like, it's so hard to always be at the top of what's happening and in touch. And so I think 10 years down the line, we'll see a lot more value at the apps level, at where people are sort of leveraging AI in a way that makes more sense for them. But right now, it makes more sense for me to be at the model level to just understand what's happening. So yeah, essentially that's a long-winded way
Well,
of.
no, but I love the way that you talk about it, because I'm not sure, Tony, we could have talked about it in that philosophical way, because, you said it's going to take me a while and us to understand it, but I reckon it understands us. Right? Like, I'm on ChatGPT literally all day when I'm writing, it's amazing. Tony, so your long career at Apple, you would have seen a huge evolution. So tell us a little bit about when you came into Apple and when you retired, and in 5 sentences or less, but maybe the thing you loved about it. Let's start there.
I always felt like I was part of something bigger that was making when we succeeded, we helped make the world a better place. And I loved, and one of the things I missed the most is the amazing people I got to work with, super smart, motivated people who are working together for a common cause. In all my years there, I never saw a case where somebody tried to get ahead by making someone else look bad. And there's politics, as there is in every company, but it was all because people had different ways of trying to get to the right result, not because we were trying to step over each other to get to some career goal.
So did you join right after business school?
I went to another company called 3Com in between. I was there for 6 years. It 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 was competing. So people think, oh, sticky paper. No, that's 3M. 3Com was competing in the late 90s with Cisco in networking hardware. And so I always say, well, have you heard of 3Com? No. Have you heard of Cisco? Yes. Guess who won?
What's interesting, Tony, about that is I had in organizational behavior, we had to go to pick a company to go and do a project with. And so we picked this tiny little company that was, I think at the time it was 300 people, to go and see its thoughts and philosophies. And it was fascinating. And it was Cisco. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Well, so I was there for 6 years, and I had thought, well, you're talking about lessons learned from Stanford. One of the things I learned is that you don't have to know it all coming out of school, and that was from a class where the speaker was John Margridge from Cisco. After so basically he was the protagonist of this case, and afterward, the whole case discussion that he listened to, he said, "Well, you guys were right. You guys had a good idea, but here's what we really did." But then he said, one of the things he said I always remembered is, I needed every ounce of wisdom I gained from 20 years at HP to have any idea how to get Cisco off the ground and how to make decisions day to day. And I was like, oh, I don't have to know it all, because this is, the 90s, and everyone's like, I have to go to a startup. And I was like, okay, so it's okay to go get some knowledge afterward and learn from a world-class company and then go to a startup. So that was my plan, and 3Com was world class in operations. But they lost, and in the end, downsized their way to oblivion, and got laid off as part of the .com bust. So I joined Apple as a safety job to see me through the .com bust. And
Wow.
22 years later, there I
Wow.
was.
So hold on. So in 1995 I don't even remember if Apple was even around. I don't remember it
Yeah,
being.
no, well, I mean, Apple was founded in 1976, I
Yeah.
think.
And what I mean is the
Yeah.
popular thing to do
Yeah.
for our
So
class.
Steve
Yeah.
Jobs didn't come back to Apple till 1997.
Got it.
So
Okay.
Apple
Okay.
was floundering on its deathbed in 1995.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
And so, yeah, in 2001, when I joined Apple, Steve had come back, had reintroduced the iMac, had simplified the product lines, and Apple had rebounded substantially.
What was your first job at Apple? How's that?
Came into a role that leveraged my engineering and business background. So it was working within operations to help get new products off the ground. And that was partnering with the design engineering teams to help influence the designs of future products and say, hey, if we qualify these suppliers, if we change this design, we can build the next generation at higher quality, higher volume, lower cost. In the meantime, they're making it more complex, so it was a never-ending battle. And then the other half is working with the teams of operations engineers to design the factory layout, to design the step-by-step, how do you assemble it, how do you measure the quality, how do you repair it, and then to actually make it happen, but to bring it all to life.
So back to the AI world, Mark. So you mentioned education. Now, so when you leave Stanford, is that education still a theme that you're going to take as you go forward in whatever you're going to do?
So no, I think I want to be very much close to the
You're going to
models.
be closer to the AI.
AI, Anthropic, obviously on the Google side, Gemini, Mistral also is an interesting one, but I think that would be interesting. But yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before you joined with Tony, but it's interesting because I think the intersection of AI and education is promising. I think in the future, for example, for this class. AI Awakening, one thing that we've been testing is working with a company called Real Avatar. And essentially what they do is they are leveraging sort of the voice aspect, from the multimodal like LLMs, where we fed a lot of the writings and a lot of the papers and a lot of the conferences that the professor did. And so essentially what this does is that a lot of students are able to interact directly with the avatar, discuss some of the readings, discuss some complex questions, essentially have a bit of leveraging the Socratic method, right? Because I think one thing that we've noticed about education is that the impact of Gen AI is that a lot of students essentially are just feeding whatever homework they have into ChatGPT, right, or Claude, and then they're getting that output and using that as their homework. And the issue is that maybe the output is okay, but it doesn't mean that they've actually put in some critical thought into it. And so here we're trying to make sure that they're actually engaging with the content. But this is still a very early application of AI. So I think my point here is that I want to be as close as possible to the models. I mean, ChatGPT came out in November 2022. I think what we are using today, personally, I talk to ChatGPT, right? Like I use the voice command a lot more now. And that wasn't possible 3 years ago. So it's really hard to know what it's going to look like in 5 years. And so I think my rationale is that I want to see, I think we're still in that part of history where AI is evolving so fast, and it's more about being close to the technology and seeing what's happening, and then looking at the applications when we're getting to some sort of plateau. Not that we will be there, but yeah, I think it looks like scaling laws are showing that
The
they work.
scaling laws, what is it, Moore's law, Tony? The capacity would, well, I don't even remember the number.
Double every 18 months.
Double every 18 months. It probably doubles every hour now, right?
Yeah,
So,
also
I mean, capacity is not even a constraint, I would say, anymore. Well, the planet will constrain us in terms of
it's the data center and the
the
power
data
usage, and
the power usage.
there
Yeah.
in the end is physical incapacity.
But when we were at Stanford, I don't recall too much interest in the environment. We certainly had a few people doing the double degree in education. We certainly had double degrees in law and maybe a few engineers. It's changed, hasn't it? How did Apple? I remember one incredible commercial that you guys did on the environment, but how did you see it infiltrate?
When after Steve Jobs' death, when Tim Cook took over, Tim kept all the things that made Apple great that Steve had done, the fanatic attention to detail and focus on making the technology simple and hide all the complexity, all that stuff. Also, use the power of Apple as one of the world's largest and most influential companies to do good. And he did it because it's the right thing to do. And it wasn't necessarily because it was going to bring Apple business. But many, many things. Like Apple won the Stop Slavery Award from Thomson Reuters for doing the most of any organization in the world to stop modern slavery, for example. But also on the environment, going beyond, we're going to have our own facilities to be carbon neutral. To go from that to having all of our production be carbon neutral by 2030 is way beyond what anyone else is doing. And I still hope it's possible, but it definitely has received a setback here in the last few months. But some of the things you need is all the airlines to change the kind of jet fuel they use. And there's not even enough of the new kinds of jet fuel available in the world. So you have to influence the world to make that kind of stuff happen. But, Tim is taking this stuff on is because it's the right thing to do, and because we have the unique situation of Apple's influence on the world, we can do it.
Yeah, so the terrible question that you answer so beautifully that I hated at this time at Stanford was, so what are you going to do?
It feels a little bit weird, if I'm honest. Yeah, I mean, it's been 2 years, and it's definitely still a simulation here. It's a very interesting bubble, and it doesn't feel like the real world. But yeah, AI, I want to be as close as possible to the technology and to models. And I was telling Tony this a little bit before, but I worked for 7 years before the GSB in sales. And it's interesting because I actually just want to go back to sales. I've tried a few other functions, and I've just realized that this is what energizes me the most. I want to be as close as possible to customers. And I feel like when I'm selling a solution that makes sense and then is transforming their business, I'm actually making an impact. So, yeah.
Tony, did we have anybody that said I'm going into sales when they finished? I don't remember.
No, I mean everyone. The popular thing was consulting or iBanking, and so the lemmings all flocked there.
I tell you, like truly artful sales, and back in the day, Mark, I'd said you need to go out door to door and sell encyclopedias or vacuum cleaners, for example, to really fundamentally understand how it works. And we would make our employees, whether it was in a grocery store or an Apple store or something like that, to really fundamentally understand that.
Do we need to go back and define encyclopedia for Mark?
As a sales guy, though, what do you love so much about it? Where's the passion? Your face lights up.
A few things. So I think one is just it's awesome to be in contact with people, right? Like obviously the B2B sales, and like it's more sort of abstract in that way. But you mentioned, going door to door. I mean, one thing that I did in college was canvassing quite a bit, right? And it's similar to that. I like the human contact. I like being able to go right there and just discuss something and figure that out. I think I enjoy the challenge of it. I tend to be a little bit competitive. I like having a quota. I like feeling like I can tangibly have a tangible impact. I can quantitatively say how much I've done essentially. And I think that's kind of cool, right? It's like in a sales job, you can say, hey, I brought in 6 million to the company this year. And that feels like a very specific impact. And it's awesome. And you feel like you can overperform and you can be better than yourself. And there's a competitive element that I enjoy. And then I think it's a good school because you have to learn to deal with rejection and failure. And that's something that you have to face for your entire life, whether it's at work or in, life or relationships or whatever it is, right? So I think it's a good school of life.
The best salespeople build, and the best salespeople build long-term win-win relationships and make a real difference for their customers or partners. Like at Apple, we thought of them. We'd be selling to Verizon or Best Buy or AT&T, and they're also huge companies, and they're our partners. And together, we're doing tens of billions of dollars of business.
Apple must be the most phenomenal case study in making something we didn't know we wanted.
Yeah, I mean that, and the really interesting thing at Apple is, I think, different than probably any other company. Any other company, if you're a sales leader, you have tremendous say as to what the next product will look like and how it will function. If you're a sales leader at Apple, you have no idea what the next product will be until it's launched. You have zero input at all. Unless you're the most senior executive, then you might get it unveiled to you, say, here's a sneak peek of what it will look like, in great secrecy, but you still don't have input to it. So it's a real difference. So at Apple, you're like, okay, here's the product. Okay, it's a surprise to me too. I'm going to go sell it.
And going back to Mark, even the fact that you're describing an AI as something that you're only just beginning to understand, how can we possibly know what we'll be selling?
I can tell you essentially some examples, but I think ultimately, just to take it a bit, like take a step back, I think ultimately this is what brings me back to education. I think ultimately what's exciting is that this is ever changing. And so it's about constantly learning. And that's something I like, right? It's the idea that I can never rest on my laurels. I can never sort of just always have the same sort of playbook that I'm using, but I have to very much adapt to how things are changing, to this product, to the impact it's making. And it's sort of a loop where the more you talk to customers into how they're using the product, into how this is impacting them, the more you understand and you think about new use cases and you're developing this with them, right? So I think in that sense, it feels very rewarding. And that's why I'm excited about it, because I get to learn a lot, I get to shape a lot. And so that's what exciting about.
What does a salesperson do in OpenAI?
So, I mean, on the B2B side, obviously, a lot like all of these startups, all of these companies are building on top of these models. So, if you look at a Zoom, for example, I know that they're leveraging Anthropic, for example, to now develop new features where you're on Zoom and you get all of your meeting notes immediately summarized by AI at the end, right? And you get that, right? So a lot of these companies are building on top of the current models to be able to develop new features, which I think is really interesting. Notion is something that people use a lot for notes. Obviously, that's leveraging AI.
The core of what we do is a payment processor leveraging proprietary blockchain technology. But why people would come use us is because of the ways we've leveraged AI. And two examples: one is for people to donate to their favorite charitable causes using our platform. One of the things we did is use AI to scrape the government database for all 501c3s, and there's like 1.2 million of them. And any that have enough information out there to do this, it automatically created a summary page for each one of these nonprofits saying, here's what we do and here's why you should donate to us, basically. So we ended up with 300,000 summary pages of nonprofits and created a search function to be able to target exactly what you want in the locality that you want. And you can make a bundle of nonprofits then that say you care about dog welfare in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You can find and create that right now. But to hire humans to scrape, the government database of 2.1 or 2.2 million nonprofits and create 300,000 summaries, that would never happen. Another use is for crowdfunding. So a lot of people want to do crowdfunding, but they have no idea how. And so most crowdfunding campaigns fail. Well, we're leveraging AI to teach people to crowdfund. And if you want to, so you can actually have a conversation with our AI to say, well, here's what I want to do. Here's my project. And it'll come back and say, well, based on what you're doing, we suggest that you target this amount and you look for this kind of people and you advertise in this way. You have to have the whole conversation of what you're trying to do to tell it what you want. And then it can give you ideas of how to do it the best way.
Yeah.
And then,
And when so Mark, you threw in something earlier on, an acronym which everybody knows in the lingo, but a lot of people don't, which is, say it again, it's the when the AI reaches a point, AGI.
Artificial general intelligence.
Okay, tell us about what that is.
I think that's the issue. I think there's no clear definition of it because ultimately, I mean, for a long time, the whole definition of artificial intelligence was around the Turing test, right? And like being able to pass the Turing test. So this idea that you wouldn't be able to know whether you're talking to a machine or a human. I think to a certain extent, a lot of current models have been able to pass the Turing test depending on who's testing it and how we define that. So artificial general intelligence is this idea that it's almost omniscient, ubiquitous, and able to do all these things. But I think if we take a bit of a philosophical standpoint here as well, like what is intelligence in the first place? As humans, there are things that we can do, but I mean, bats can have like sonars and like see distances in ways that we can't, right? Like animals have forms of intelligence that we don't have in terms of abilities and things that they can do in the world. Whereas obviously, maybe we have more of like critical thinking and things that we think animals don't have, right? Or reasoning. But ultimately, it's hard to determine what are all these sort of facets of intelligence and when do we access that essentially, and what do we define as this ultimate artificial general intelligence. But essentially I think the idea is like, if you think about Sam Altman's vision, I think it's more about having a model that is able to do all of these things that humans are currently doing and to render work obsolete to a certain extent. Which is that a society that we want to work in, right? Like, what is the purpose that people are going to have if we're a post-work reality? So that's a whole complex question. But I do think there is a world where a lot of the things that we're currently doing are going to be done by machines.
How is Apple, Tony? How have you seen? You talked a little bit about how Apple's responding.
I think that was actually Apple's big push into AI last year, is to say that Apple has this unique position of controlling the hardware, the apps, and the software, and being able to integrate it all, and can make AI actually useful for every human rather than just people doing research or people doing specialized cases. By it knowing what you do every day and how you do it, and being able to help you do it more efficiently. And that's the idea of Apple AI, and it's taking time to roll out. But yeah, that was kind of Apple's unique ability to contribute in the space.
It's extraordinary. You also used a word that's important to me, Mark, is the Socratic method and our ability to ask questions. And you're suggesting your generation may not have that as much. That's the art, right? How do you ask questions? Talk a little bit about how that's manifested in the business school.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in business school so far because obviously we're being very disrupted in terms of pedagogy when it comes to AI, but ultimately because we're still leveraging the case method for a lot of classes. We're still mostly discussion based and debate based. I think it's hard to be able to just output something through a model, through a language model, right? At the moment, but I'm more worried about education that's meant for you to learn very specific things and have reasoning and then output a problem set, right? Because that's being disrupted so much currently by the models where people are just able to leverage that without doing the work. I've talked to a lot of undergrads here as well because I think it's interesting. And also this across the street class that I'm taking has half business school, like 20% PhDs, and then the rest are undergrads. And the undergrads here are very exactly. And they're very intentional at trying to not use AI for their problem sets because they're worried that then it becomes too easy and they're not training in that way. And I think we need to rethink the pedagogy. And obviously, this is why I had to get a little bit away from education in the moment because I think we're at a juncture where it's really important to think about all of this. And that's why I want to be on the model side. But I think one thing that is just interesting philosophically is that, you know, this analogy that, the calculator came out, but we still needed mathematicians, obviously, right? Because it's all more abstract than that. Models are allowing us to simplify language or to not necessarily have to write as much. And that's already a big change for humanity. But I think the biggest change for me that I'm worried about is what happens when we delegate reasoning, right? We're moving from language models to reasoning models. You look at O3, that's more of a reasoning model. And isn't that what makes us different from animals? Not that we're, I'm not trying to create a hierarchy or anything here, but I think when we're trying to find a definition of humans, that tends to be something that we bring in, right? Reasoning and the ability to think in a different way, to dream, all of these things, though you apparently dogs can dream. But then if we're delegating that completely to machines, what are we? And I think that there is sort of an existential sort of question here.
Tony, what does one do when one says the R word, retired?
Well, certain things that you just can't do, passions that you can't pursue while only having 2 to 3 weeks off a year. And for me, I grew up mountain climbing in the Cascades. Grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and I always had this long lifetime goal of climbing Denali. But it's a month trip, and not to mention the training, which takes multiple hours per day, and it's just not possible. So um, I trained for it last year and spent 3 weeks on the mountain. We got to 18,000 feet, 4 hours from the summit, and had to turn back there. And I thought I'm going to give this one more shot. So I'm in the end stages of training again, and leaving in 2 months for another shot at that. And I just came back from a month in Nepal. I always wanted to go to the Himalayas and do some trekking there, and I did some climbing as well. So I got another thing you just can't do when you don't have enough time. And then beyond that, it's like that's kind of taking up my mornings is training for mountain climbing. But in the afternoons, I have, like I said, I'm invested in a startup that I'm heavily involved with getting off the ground. I'm actually just invested in a brewery that I'm going to work with, and I'm on the board of my HOA. I've been working with a nonprofit, like stuff that it keeps me active and busy. It's fun, and I like to do, and challenges and teaches me new things. So yeah, it's all good. I love retirement. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that is life. And that's actually back to the question of what work is, right? So what is work? And,
You just transition to different things, but it's pursuing passions and projects that are passions that you love and projects that are interesting.
well, it's in that place. So if you zoom forward, Mark, and literally 30 years, we are asking ourselves, what does the day look like? In the AI awakened.
It's interesting. Obviously, it's everyone has a different scenario in mind, and it's really hard to anticipate and predict. But my hope is that indeed, like machines are able, and we coexist really well, right? There's no issue here, right? There's also a doom scenario, a sci-fi scenario where there's a machine uprising. I think we've seen a lot of that. I think it's a world where hopefully technology has given access to a lot of people to things. So I'm hoping that on the education side now, people in countries where they don't have access to as much resources, as many resources, are able to have a personalized tutor. And there's more, and the day to day is more about finding your own purpose, finding the meaning of life, enjoying leisure in a way. A lot of work has become obsolete on the human side, and it's machines producing a lot. And then hopefully we're in a society where people are just able to enjoy the small things and go back to a simpler life where it's about, hopefully a beautiful retirement for everyone, like exploring the world, hiking, mountain climbing, gardening, taking care of your family, creating art, and doing things that we enjoy in a way that feels fulfilling.
It's Wednesday. What would a absolutely perfect Wednesday look for you?
I mean, I personally love working, which is why I have two part-time jobs, and I'm also TAing while I'm business school. So, clearly I have an issue there. I think a perfect day is like waking up early, going to the gym, having a bit of a mindfulness time around there, and for me that's a good me time. And then going to work, having a very social time at work, and I think that's why I enjoy sales, just talking to people, being with colleagues as well, and then hopefully having a hobby in the afternoon. And so for now it's photography, but who knows what it will be after. Yeah.
Well, photography itself must be changing radically.
It's interesting if you think about the creative aspect. I mean, I'm working with one company. It's called Raspberry, right? And what they're doing is Gen AI for the fashion industry specifically, and it's helping designers sketch a lot faster. Essentially, you're able to prompt very clearly what kind of clothes you want, and then you can give very specific feedback on, for example, the sleeve and so on. So you could say, okay, well, this is changing radically how we design, but I think it's not about automation, it's more about augmentation. And the way I think about photography is that obviously we've seen a lot of improvements throughout the history of photography, right? Like, I mean, the first few, like, you had to expose something for like an hour before getting able to get a photo, right? Back in the like 40s or whatever that was. And I think it's just technology has helped photography, but ultimately it's more about what you kind of art you're trying to do. So yeah, so I think, yeah, I mean, I took an across the street class for photography here, and it was interesting because it was more about being proactive rather than reactive. I always saw photography as me capturing beautiful moments around me. But that class was more about creating art. It was more about, okay, kinship is the theme. What am I trying to do around kinship? And coming up with a concept. And I actually leveraged ChatGPT a lot for that because I would prompt ideas that I had because I wanted to see what it could look like. And so that gave me ideas as well. And I just had this whole conversation and then would end up like doing a photo shoot, having someone model for me and do a whole thing. But so I still think that even with technology advancing, we have a lot of agency around how we conceptualize art.
That's a great example. I love how you've just described it. And when you're working with ChatGPT, is it actually drawing or describing it in words for you?
So I describe it in words and then I get an image. I'm saying, so kinship, I'm thinking this, I want this kind of tone. I'm thinking these colors. I'm thinking this kind of sort of facial expression. Just trying to think my concept, but sometimes visualizing it in a way that's quite literal rather just in your mind helps. And then I'm like, okay, that doesn't work. So I need to do something else instead.
Wow.
Go back to your passion, Tony. The incredible outdoors. And here I'm picturing you on Denali. You're going to do it again. How does technology help you?
Yeah, I mean, the gear is better. Lighter was the big factor. Like anything you can do to reduce ounces on there because you carry, and then always one mountain where you cannot hire anybody to help you carry anything. So it's all you with your, and you tow a sled along with your heavy backpack. So yeah, lighter, better gear is great, but also navigation is a big way that technology has changed mountaineering a lot. I mean, I grew up with like you'd have to bring a paper map and a compass and like be sighting things, and now it's all GPS, and there's lots of apps that make that far better. Of course, you have to carry a solar panel to keep your phone charged if that's what you're relying on for navigation. But yeah, anyway, that it's a simple place where there is no you are cut off from the rest of the world, other than brief like satellite, just a few character text conversations you can have maybe once a day. But also, then you're relying on technology for your navigation, for your life and safety. We got to 19,000 feet elevation. We were 4 hours from the summit at that point after 3 weeks on the mountain. I- The odds are no better next year. And the thought process I had to go through, and I had to decide really quickly because it was like, it was a rush to, the last spots were available when we came down for next year or for this year. But the thought process I went through is if I knew for sure that I would not make it to the summit this time, the second time, would I still choose to do that in order to spend 3 to 4 weeks on that mountain in that unique place in the world one more time? And I said, yeah, I'd do that.
That is a life metaphor. All right. Well, as we bring it to a close, what do we have to say to Mark, Tony?
I came up with two thoughts on this. One, I hinted at this before, but it's okay to not know everything. And it's okay to not be to not be the smartest person in the room or the person with the great ideas. But the key is being able to recognize great ideas when you hear them and to be able to bring people together to act on them and to bring them to fruition. I always, that was kind of when I think of what special sauce did I bring in my career, it was like, that's a good idea. How are we going to do this? But I was rarely the guy who had the bright idea. So that's one thing. And I think I like Bill Grader from Stanford thinking, do they have to be the smartest person in the room? And you just don't. And then the other thing is the importance of culture and purpose to an organization and to business success. There was a TED talk by a guy named Simon Sinek a while back. The crux of it, he said, if if they believe what you believe, then people will work for you with blood, sweat, and tears. Otherwise, they'll just work for a paycheck. And
There you go.
if you can create a sense of purpose and of working for something bigger than ourselves, then you can create that sort of experience for the people that work with you. But otherwise, yeah, just working for a paycheck, and they can go anywhere else and get that too.
And you had it, Tony. I mean, just as you described the apple, it was just wonderful to see your face, describe such an amazing place to work. And just as important, Mark, we need all the help we can. What do you need from us? And what would you tell us to get our act together on?
But I think where I think we need every single generation to work on is climate. I think ultimately, I'm hoping that AI will solve this for us and we'll be able to come up with solutions, scientifically at least, or help with scientific research. But I would love for all generations to be able to work in climate, because I think ultimately that's what is most pressing, and that's what we need to be able to do joint efforts for.
Thanks, you guys.
Couldn't agree
Really
more.
can't agree more. Thank you for joining us. For more insights and information, visit my website at katherinemclennan.com. That's spelled KATHARINEMCLENNAN.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the series so you know when the next episode will be, as we continue exchanging wisdom, connecting past, present, and future through the perspectives of Stanford MBA graduates of 1995 and 2025.